On social media, or if you go into your local bank, you'll see pictures of happy mom, dad, and the kids, and maybe the grandparents. Mysteriously, mom and dad are only ever 35 years of age, and the kids are always delightfully young, maybe 10 or 11 years of age, not those nasty teenagers. And grandma and grandpa are about 60, not really decrepit. They're not on Zimmer frames. They're not pooping themselves. Everybody's bright, everybody's happy in this ideal world. Hi, today I want to talk about the topic of being real. How can we be real in this crazy world of ours? If you, like me, you like watching YouTube videos, you'll notice that when you switch them on, there seems to be endless chaos and anarchy in the world around us. Everything's a big mess, and everybody's confused, and everybody's very tense. And there's a high anxiety is there. We've got all sorts of terrible problems. Ukrainian war. We've got this Israel-Gaza thing going on. We've got cost of living crisis. We've got people recovering from the coronavirus and all of its variabilities. And the world seems to be in quite a mess. And in the midst of all of this, we have the many constraints in society of somehow trying to fit in and trying to be a part of society and somehow trying to be ourselves. And I think what a lot of people are waking up to is the realization that the world that we're in is basically fake. It's not real. The images that we're given of celebrities and red carpets and all this nonsense. Meanwhile, ordinary people are struggling to pay the rent, struggling to go and put food on their table. And the values that society promotes or gives us are basically bullshit values. So we're told to study really hard. We're told to go out and go to a good college, get into debt to get into that good college. We're told to get a good job and work hard and save well, and someday get a dog and a cat and a kid or two, and buy a house and have a car and have some dream holiday and all this stuff. And is it real? No, it's not real. It's all pretty silly, really. If you go into if you see all these ads that are sent out to you all the time on social media, or if you go into your local bank, you'll see pictures of happy mom, dad, and the kids, and maybe the grandparents. Mysteriously, mom and dad are only ever 35 years of age, and the kids are always delightfully young, maybe 10 or 11 years of age, not those nasty teenagers. Grandma and grandpa are about 60, not really decrepit. They're not on Zimmer frames. They're not pooping themselves. Everybody's bright, everybody's happy in this ideal world. In the country that I live in India, these days nearly everybody's buying an SUV. The cost of an SUV is double the cost of the previous cars these people bought. Do they need an SUV, considering the massive endless traffic jams that we have in India? Probably not. Actually, almost definitely not. But they're convinced that they need an SUV. If you look at house prices now, house prices have increased over the last 30 years. They've increased drastically. It's now become increasingly unaffordable to buy a house. And it's creating a two-class system, or certainly will do over the next few decades, of those who have houses and can rent them out and make money and invest in new houses, and those who rent forever in kind of eternal serfdom. If you play it by the rules, if you do everything that you're supposed to do, you're going to be broke. And you're probably going to be unhappy. Because you're going to spend an awful lot of time and money training to get a job that you probably don't like and doesn't pay you very well. And if the truth be known, there's not a lot of money in the job unless you're in that top 1% of jobs. And even if you go out and do your own business, it's hard to make it in business, and getting increasingly hard to make it in business in this global world. And even if you do well in the corporate sector, you have to fight it out with that internal politics. And yet society is telling you that you should have certain things. A fancy car, and a fancy lifestyle, and a fancy home that you can't afford, and education you can't afford. All of this unrealistic bullshit. So in the midst of all of this, where is your happiness? Where is your satisfaction? Are you satisfied? Are you happy with this crazy world that's driving you in all sorts of crazy directions? The answer is not simple, it's rather complicated, but there are certain things that we can do to acerbate or make things better for ourselves. Basically, the first thing we have to realize is that we're living in a fake world. we're living in a world that's a system, and everything is a system, and this particular system is all about money. And the golden rule of this world is that everybody wants your money. So everything that you're being seen and shown is trying to entice you to spend money on their course, on their program, on their building, on their facility, on their service. Everything is about money, and everybody's trying to make money, and everybody's trying to get to the top of that layer cake called material society. That's the first thing. The second thing to realize is that in our society, nobody wants to face the reality. Everybody's constantly in denial of the reality, and there's so many realities to face. So how can we improve society? Well, for a start, we have to realize that society is not facing up to reality. So our individual reality is not being faced up to. Never mind the reality of society. So the world that we're in is somewhat fake. It's not real, and it's based upon fitting in and becoming something in the society. And the reason why we have a kind of pop culture, a celebrity culture, is to take a few iconic people and put them up there and say, you too could be like them. You could be rich, you could be powerful, you could be famous. And if you talk to those people, you'll find that they're only rich, powerful, and famous usually for a certain amount of time. Celebrities in particular have a shelf life of maybe 10, 15, 20 years. Politicians and power brokers may be longer, but they too also fail. Nearly every politician that becomes a prime minister or president fails. I mean, at the end, they get kicked out, and then usually it's over. They can be 40 years of age and their career is basically over. Where'd you go after being prime minister or president? You write a book and you do the rounds and all that stuff. That's all you do. So our society is designed to be glorious for that small number of people who are at the top, whether it be the rich people or the famous people, or the person who's trending with a certain book or a certain topic, and they're the one getting the accolades, and they're the one getting the awards, and they're the ones getting the TV interviews, and the rest of us are just getting on with things. So we have to see the world for what it is and understand that there's no realism in the world, that our society can't face up to the realities. And what's the realities? There's so many endless realities, but I suppose at a very baseline is that our world is basically unfair, and that there's a small number of people who make most of the money and the rest of us just get on with things. There's also an endless underclass of people that nobody wants to deal with because it's too difficult to deal with. So governments around the world usually like giving handouts rather than trying to fix the social problems of society. In a nutshell, civilization is too complex to fix. And so rather than fixing it, we all brush over and we try, and it's like your house is in bits, but some relatives or known people come to visit you, and your mom says tidy the house and take out the best cutlery and so on, and we'll just show them into the living room. We won't show them the rest of the house, which is in bits. It's like that in our society, in our civilizations. I'm not saying that anybody's bad or evil. Of course, there are bad and evil people, but I'm saying in general, most governments and so on are just getting on with things, interminable problems that nobody can seem to fix. And to fix them is very, very difficult. For example, I do feel that we could fix the inequality of the world. But to fix inequality, for example, if you take a city that has a lot of poor people, you'd have to give each of those families a huge amount of support in the form of social workers and psychotherapists, education therapists and so on. And you'd have to look after that family or that group of people for maybe 20 or 30 years to get them up to speed. They would require a huge amount of support. I mean, tens of millions of dollars per family over 30 or 40 years to get one family on track. And it's just easier for a government, instead of saying we're going to spend billions and billions and billions and billions and billions over the next 30, 40 years solving inequality and poverty in our country, instead we'll just give a few $100 million per year patching up. I mean, in the long term, having terrible inequality in your country and having a lot of poverty for a chunk of people, having very, very bad poverty, and it actually costs your country a lot of money over 50 years, 100 years, when you could probably fix it in 30 years if you did all the right things. But to do the right things cost a fortune, and also some sacrifice for the wealthier people in society will probably lose money in the process. It's just easier to go along to get along. I suppose that's the second rule of the world. The first rule of the world is everybody wants your money, and the second rule of the world is everyone is going along to get along, because it's too much hassle to actually solve the problems of society. So what are you supposed to do about it so that you can be real, so that you can be happy, so you can be satisfied, so you can be fulfilled? Well, what I'd say to you is, first of all, realize that you're never going to fix the problems of society. If it makes you feel any better, society is a lot more fair and helpful now than it was 100 years ago, and way fairer than it was, say, 1,000 years ago. For example, an interesting statistic I came across recently was that in England, for example, 1,000 years ago, around 1000 AD, 10% of the population were slaves. So, I mean, we have improved a lot. There's a lot less slavery. So there's always manipulations, there's always abused people, but they seem to be coming down with each century. So we do seem to be progressing. But you specifically are not going to solve the problems of the world. And even if we all do the right things, there's always going to be also an unsolvable problem around the corner. There's a basic difficulty of human life, and we all try and get on with it and don't want to face it too much. So that's the first basic thing I would suggest to you. The second thing with being real then is just to realize that there's a difference between the public world and the private world. And that what the world is trying to do is a bit like this analogy I'm giving you of your mom and there's some guest comes and you take out the best cutlery. It's like we're trying to do that all the time. We're trying to present the picture, and the people in power and authority are trying to present certain pictures to you that will get you to fit in and get along, rather than deal with all the thorny issues like that. The world isn't working so well, and maybe you're not getting a fair deal, and maybe the government has no intention of giving you a fair deal. The capitalistic society has no intention of giving you a fair deal. So what are you going to do about it? So the first thing to realize is that don't buy into this thing that I have to buy a certain house and buy a certain car and go on a certain holiday and own certain clothes and live a certain lifestyle. I don't have to buy into that. And people have an ideal, what Sigmund Freud would call the ego ideal, which is basically that we're seeking or we're pursuing or we're running after an ideal image. Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, would talk about the mirror and the imaginary and how that we see a mirror image of ourselves. We never really see ourselves as we are. We see ourselves like if you look in a mirror, we always get a shock when we see ourselves on the camera because the camera, the right side is the right and the left side is the left. But in mirrors, it's the opposite. The right side is over here and the left side is over there. So we get a shock when we see how people actually see us. So what Lacan is suggesting is that we build up a worldview of ourselves based upon impressions. Like somebody says, hey, he's got his dad's eyes. Ooh, she's just like her auntie. Wow, I remember my neighbor was like that. So we pick up on these things as small kids, and the projections of society that project certain images of ideals onto you as a small child. And as a result of these things, you end up building a persona, and the persona is not really you. It's a false image of yourself. And the biggest mistake we can have is believing the persona, because the persona will be buying into things like to buy a certain car and to wear certain clothes and live a certain lifestyle, which costs you a huge amount of money. And unless you're living a rich lifestyle, it's hard to support. It makes more logical sense to find out what you really want to do and spend time and energy on things you really want to do, and maybe save that money and use it more usefully for other things, and maybe not work so hard in the first place. So who you think you are is basically a persona. But deep inside that persona is a real you. And I'm of the belief that there is a real person. And what we actually do is we unmask that real person, we unmask that person over time. There's the famous quotation, for example, from, or reference to Michelangelo, and asked about how he does his great, how Michelangelo would create these fantastic statues like the David, the famous one, the guy's got the fig leaf over his genitals, that guy. And he said, I don't create, I find it. I chisel away at the rock because I know that great statue is inside a rock. I find it inside, and that's the ethos that I believe in, that there is an essential you, a real you with a real purpose. Not so long ago, I was doing a video about Carlos Castaneda and the idea of intent and intention, the power of intention, there's some lively discussions in the comment sections about intention and intent, because there's a guy called Wayne Dwyer talked about the power of intention, of course, that you have Carlos Castaneda on intent. And Carlos Castaneda's idea of intent is very, very similar, perhaps copied from Aleister Crowley, the famous black magician of the 20th century. His idea of do as thou wilt be the whole of the law. And he had the idea that there's a thing called the true will. And the true will is, it's not just what I will something and I'm going to make it happen, which is part of this thing of unbending intent, but it's also finding what is my true will. In other words, what do I really want? You might remember the movie The Matrix. I think it was in the first one where Neo, he talks to this lady called the Oracle, and she mentions that he's got the powers, but he hasn't made a decision yet about it. So he goes off and thinks he's not really the one, the chosen one, in the story. But later he would be faced with a situation whereby he has to save his mentor. And so in that situation, he realizes that he has to go back and save him. And that is a decision. He made the decision. So he has everything right to be the one, but he hasn't made the decision. So only you can make the decision what you have to do and what you want to be. And so the problem that you have, and that we all have, is that we're continuously blasted by these impressions from outside saying who you are, but it's not who you are. It's all about trying to get you to fit in. And a lot of it's well meant. I honestly think that most of the things we see in society are actually well meant. They're actually designed to try and get us to fit in and get along, and we all want to be happy. But you know something? I might want you to be happy, but I'll try and dominate you and make you happy the way I think you would be happy. And that's not going to make you happy. What's going to make you happy is finding out what you want. Not what I want, or your mom wants, or your auntie wants, or the guy next door wants, or your boss wants, or your daughter, your mother, or your girlfriend wants, your boss wants, but what do you want? And this is the real thing. So you want to be real, you have to find out what you want, not what anybody else wants. And so we have to begin by realizing that we have a persona. And secondly, we have to begin by realizing that there is a real me inside. And it's very difficult to find because there's a whole bunch of me's. You might have seen this thing of the Russian dolls, very famous, very pretty. They have these little dolls, a big doll, and you open them, there's a smaller doll, smaller doll, smaller doll, smaller doll, smaller doll. So it's like that. You have to go through these series of sub-personalities because you have you, but you also have sub-personalities of you. And so you have to, and they're real, those sub-personalities, so the angry you, the happy you, and so on, they're sub-personalities. But behind even all those sub-personalities is the essence of who you are. And this is what all the esoteric scientists are talking about, and the gurus and so on. What they're all really talking about is becoming the real you. To master yourself, to become a spiritual master, is to become the real you, who you really are. So maybe as a final analogy which I give out here would be, if you can think of stained glass windows. I used to go to this church on the weekdays back when I used to live in Dublin, and to be nobody in that church, and it's very maybe built in the 60s, had very nice stained glass windows. I sit there, we have like a dappled sky in Dublin, the clouds coming, going, sun's coming, going, it's like that. And as it's going through the windows, it's giving different colors, yellow color, a blue color, this one goes dull and this one goes very bright. It looks really beautiful. And so the thing is to see that who you are, the kind of your soul essence, is like these amazing colors. And if there's nothing blocking it, and the divine light is going through it, you become this divinized version of yourself. But at the beginning, there's layers of dirt, so you can't see anything. And then bit by bit, you clean the layers of dirt, and now you've gone beyond the persona, but you're getting into some personalities, and there's some light coming, but not full light coming, because they're giving a discoloration. And eventually you clean it, and eventually you have the full coloration or divinization. And of course, sometimes as the sun shines, the divine grace falls, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't, even the most divine person is a bit dull, and if it does fall, even the most ordinary person is very illuminated. So these are the differences in spiritual states and so on. So to be real, we have to begin by realizing that society is basically screwed. It's okay. It can never really be fixed. It can slowly be improved over multiple generations. So between now and the end of your life, the world could either be a little bit better or a little bit worse. But it's never going to be solved. I mean, unless something amazing happens, like some amazing transformation, which is way out of our hands. So you have to row your own boat in your life, regardless of what's happening in the world around you. Realize that largely what you're being marketed is just marketing. Realize that who you think you are is actually a persona, and behind a persona is subpersonalities, and way behind all the subpersonalities is an essential self. When you get down to that essential self, then you're getting into the area of what Crowley would call true will, what Carlos Castaneda would call unbending intent. And when you get down to this true person, who you really are, it's like it starts taking you over, because the weird thing is your role as an ego in this world, as a human being, you're the person watching this video, make a choice in your life, is to select and deselect certain things. And when we deselect enough things, that we start letting go of the outer false persona and becoming who we really are. And we do this through various things, spiritual practices, meditation, reading books, talking to people, doing some psychotherapy, self-help, diary writing, all these sort of different things, many, many things. There's no one thing that's going to unearth who you are. It's going to be a process over time, and you're probably already on it if you're watching this video. But eventually a stage will come whereby this who you really are, this real you, or we could say maybe soul consciousness or the soul you, or whatever it is, it's very hard to describe it because we're just going by experience, so we can't be objective about it. But whoever that being is, when you start to seek it, it starts to seek you. And when it starts to seek you, it's like you have been given free will in this life to do what you want. But when you start seeking it, you've now chosen as your free will to let your higher self work. And once the higher self starts seeing that you're on the boat, it will say, okay, I will do it. It's like, for example, if you're on a, this thing of a big ship, for example. When the ship wants to go to port, the guy will come, the pilot will come. I forget what he called this guy, but he comes in a small boat, like a tug or something, and he says, follow me. And you might be having the biggest ship, a big oil rig or a big luxury liner or whatever, but when you come to that port, you have to follow him, because he knows where the sand dunes are, he knows where the water is low and the tide is high and where there's rocks, and he knows all these things. And if you don't follow him, you're going to crash your boat. You have to surrender the control of your boat to this guy in this little tug. And so he's got a small little boat just ahead of you, and you're following him. And you have to follow him legally to get into port. You have to do that. And if you don't like crashing your boat, you probably best to follow this guy, because he is an expert on that port. That's like your higher self. So once you make the decision, and the thing of making the decision is like, I make the decision now to follow my higher self. That's the beginning, but there's a stage will come through a series of decisions and experiences over time, that you'll make a certain amount of progress over time. And a stage will come when the real decision is taken. That's where we get to true will. True will is when the real decision, from deep inside yourself, you choose deeply to go for this. Then the higher self, like that pilot, will take you over, and you'll find that you're not running your life, but this, your higher self, your soul, God, whatever you want to call it, is actually running the show. And then your job is just to surrender and go with the flow, because it will start predicating everything else, will just mysteriously start happening, and it's not up to you anymore. It's a very bizarre thing. The ultimate freedom is to surrender your freedom, not to the government, but to who you really are, the real you, and that is being real. So I take it that you're here watching this video because you're serious about this stuff, and congratulations. It's good to realize the world is largely bullshit and fake, and that we need to kind of find ourselves, and we need to realize that we have to row our own boat, and we're not going to fix all the problems in the world, but that, wherever you are now, keep working towards finding out who you really are and becoming the real you. And don't worry, if you do it enough, eventually a stage will come where the real you will start coming out, and it will exert itself, and it has total confidence, and it will guide you, and which Aleister Crowley would talk about a thing called the guardian angel. That is the guardian angel. The guardian angel is the real you. Okay, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and just keep chugging away. If you're doing good, keep it up. Talk to you next time. Bye for now.